The air inside the Grand Council chamber on Nexus Prime tasted like recycled metal and tension. Jake Morrison, the 52-year-old human ambassador to the Galactic Council, adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform and cast a sidelong glance at Lieutenant Kate Sullivan. The 25-year-old officer stood ramrod straight beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the cavernous chamber for the first time. "Breathe, Lieutenant," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the environmental systems. "They may look different from us, but politicians are the same across the universe." "Yes, sir," Kate replied, her gaze fixed on the massive semicircular table where representatives of over 30 alien species sat in various forms of seating adapted to their physiologies. Some floated in suspension tanks, others perched on high platforms, and a few sprawled across cushioned slabs. Jake had served humanity for 30 years in this chamber, through wars, medical crises, and technological exchanges. Humanity had fought alongside the Council against the Draar insurgency, provided medical relief during the Tarsus Plague, and shared engineering innovations that revolutionized interstellar travel. They had earned their place among the stars, or so Jake had believed. Speaker Vexathara, a Zolani with iridescent scales and 6 upper limbs, raised all of her appendages for silence. The chamber quieted immediately, the various conversations in dozens of languages fading away. "This council session will now address Resolution 4471, Vexathara announced, her translator rendering her sibilant speech into the common galactic standard. "Concerning the developmental supervision of Species 4227, designation, humans." Jake felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't on the agenda he'd received. "Ambassador Morrison," the speaker continued, "the Council has observed with increasing concern the aggressive expansion of human colonies beyond the Outer Rim territories. The resolution before us today would restrict human mining and colonization rights to systems already occupied, pending a 5-century supervision period." The chamber remained silent, but Jake could feel the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon him. Kate shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Speaker, with all due respect," Jake began, keeping his voice measured despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Humanity has been a council member for 3 decades. We've contributed to peacekeeping forces, medical corps, and technological development. On what grounds does the Council propose to treat us like a pre-spaceflight species?" Ambassador Torvik of the Tauran hegemony leaned forward, his massive, bear-like form dominating his section of the table. "The grounds, Ambassador Morrison, are clear. Your species has demonstrated a concerning pattern of aggression, resource hoarding, and cultural imposition that requires guidance." "Guidance?" Jake repeated incredulously. "We've sacrificed thousands of lives defending Council worlds from the Draar. Our medical teams work in the most dangerous plague zones. Our engineers have shared innovations that benefit all Council species." Ambassador Zeloth, a Zolani, like the speaker, fluttered her upper limbs dismissively. "And yet you arm your colony ships with military-grade weapons. You establish outposts with minimal ecological consultation. Your cultural transmissions overwhelm local traditions. You are promising, but immature." Jake felt his face flush with anger. Beside him, Kate's hands had balled into fists. "The resolution also requires compensatory resource transfers from human colonies to affected neighboring systems," the speaker added, as though this were a minor afterthought. "Implementation would begin within 1 standard galactic year." The chamber erupted into murmurs. Jake recognized the political theater for what it was. This had been planned, likely for months, with key council members already in agreement. He glanced at the representatives from the Mandari Confluence and the Croatian Republic, species that had worked closely with humans for years. They avoided his gaze. Jake straightened his shoulders. 30 years of diplomatic training had taught him patience, the art of compromise, the value of the long game. But something in him had snapped. Perhaps it was the dismissive flutter of Ambassador Zeloth's limbs, or the patronizing tone of guidance, or simply the weight of 3 decades representing humanity among beings who clearly still saw them as primitives. Speaker Vexathara, Jake said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. I would like to remind the Council of the Battle of Kepler 186, where the human fleet held the line against the Drar Armada, while the Zalani forces regrouped. Or perhaps the Tarsus outbreak, where human doctors developed the vaccine that saved millions of Tauran lives, including, I believe, your own nephew, Ambassador Torvik. The large, bear-like alien growled, a sound his translator didn't bother to interpret. We've rebuilt orbital stations destroyed in conflicts we didn't start. We've shared agricultural techniques that doubled food production in 3 sectors. We've provided safe haven for refugees when ancient species with vast resources claimed they couldn't accommodate them. Jake took a step forward. And now, after all that, you propose to treat us like children who need guidance, to restrict our growth, to demand reparations for what exactly? Existing too successfully? Ambassador Morrison, the speaker interrupted, her scales shifting to a darker hue. Your emotional response illustrates precisely our concerns. More mature species understand the necessity of council oversight for the greater harmony. Greater harmony? Jake laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it when established species protect their advantages and ensure newcomers remain subordinate? The chamber went deathly quiet. Jake knew he was crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, but 30 years of deference and cooperation had led to this moment anyway. What was the point of continued diplomacy? Humanity will not accept Resolution 4471, he stated flatly. Furthermore, I am authorized by my government to submit our formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. Kate gasped beside him. This wasn't part of their briefing. No species had ever voluntarily left the Council in its millennia of existence. Jake reached into his uniform pocket and removed a small data crystal, placing it on the speaker's podium with a definitive click that echoed through the silent chamber. This contains our formal notice of withdrawal, termination of all treaties and agreements, and the immediate recall of all human personnel from Council operations. Humanity will no longer contribute to or be bound by Council decisions. Ambassador Zeloth rose from her seat, all 6 limbs quivering with what Jake assumed was anger. You cannot simply withdraw. There are procedures, transition periods, compensatory obligations, all of which apply to species who respect the Council's authority, Jake interrupted. Since you clearly don't respect us as equals, we no longer recognize your authority. Effective immediately. All human worlds are closed to Council representatives. All trade agreements are suspended. All technology sharing programs are terminated. The chamber exploded into chaos. Dozens of species shouting, gesturing, some even physically restraining others. Jake turned to Kate, whose face had gone pale. Sir, she whispered, are we authorized to do this? Jake's smile was grim. We are now. Speaker Vexathara slammed a ceremonial staff against the floor, the booming sound gradually restoring order. Her scales had shifted to a deep purple, a color Jake had never seen on a Zalani before. Ambassador Morrison, she hissed, you cannot unilaterally withdraw from the Council. The implications for interstellar stability are no longer humanity's concern. Jake finished for her. You've made it abundantly clear that we're not considered equals here. Very well. We'll make our own way. He turned to leave, Kate following in stunned silence. If you leave this chamber, Ambassador Zeloth called after him, your species will face consequences beyond your primitive understanding. Jake paused at the massive doorway, turning back to face the assembled representatives of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. Perhaps, he acknowledged, or perhaps you'll discover what it means to lose the one species that still remembers how to solve problems without millennia of precedent to guide them. Either way, This is goodbye." As the doors closed behind them, Jake let out a long, shaky breath. The gravity of what he'd just done threatened to overwhelm him. "Sir," Kate said quietly, "what happens now?" Jake straightened his shoulders. "Now, Lieutenant, we prepare for the hard part." The journey back to Earth took 17 days in hyperspace. 17 days during which Jake alternated between confidence in his decision and terror at its potential consequences. He'd transmitted an encrypted message to President Lisa Carter immediately after leaving the council chamber. But the quantum entanglement communicator could only send text, not receive. He had no idea what awaited him at home. When their diplomatic vessel emerged from hyperspace near the Mars defense perimeter, Jake was surprised to find not the expected security escort, but a full honor guard of 20 warships arranged in ceremonial formation. "Ambassador Morrison," came the voice of Admiral Harris over the comm system. "On behalf of the President and the people of Earth, welcome home. Your transport is cleared for direct landing at Washington Prime." Kate, who had spent the journey alternating between supporting Jake's decision and panicking about its implications, raised an eyebrow. "That's not the reception I expected." "Me neither," Jake admitted. The diplomatic vessel's captain, Alex Rodriguez, a veteran of both diplomatic missions and military engagements, swiveled in his chair. "Word travels fast, Ambassador. Even faster when you've just told the most powerful organization in the galaxy to go to hell." As they descended through Earth's atmosphere, Jake glimpsed the sprawling megacity that Washington, D.C. had become. Its gleaming towers and verdant parklands a testament to humanity's resilience after the climate wars. The diplomatic vessel touched down on a landing pad adjacent to the rebuilt White House, where a small delegation waited. President Lisa Carter stood at the forefront, her dark skin contrasting with her silver-white hair and the formal blue suit of her office. Beside her stood Admiral Harris, Secretary of State Williams, and several other cabinet members Jake recognized. As Jake descended the ramp, the president stepped forward and, to his shock, saluted him formally. "Ambassador Morrison," she said, loud enough for the assembled press drones to capture. "On behalf of a grateful nation and planet, I commend your courage in defending humanity's dignity and sovereignty." Jake returned the salute awkwardly. "Madam President, I must apologize for exceeding my authority. The decision to withdraw was precisely what I would have ordered had I been there," she interrupted, then lowered her voice. "Though a heads-up would have been appreciated." Jake nodded, relief washing over him. "I understand there will be consequences, Madam President." "Without doubt," she agreed, guiding him toward the White House. "But perhaps not the ones the Council expects." The emergency session of the Global Security Council lasted 14 hours. Representatives from Earth's nations and off-world colonies debated the implications of withdrawal, the potential for economic disruption, and the very real military threat the Council could pose if they chose. "The Zilani alone have ships that could crack a planet's crust," the Chinese representative pointed out. "And we've just insulted them in front of the entire galactic community." "But they won't," Jake countered, standing before the assembled leaders. "Not immediately. At least, it would undermine the benevolent image they've cultivated for millennia." Admiral Harris nodded in agreement. "They'll try economic isolation first, cut off our trade routes, deny access to their markets. They believe we're dependent on their technology." "Aren't we?" asked the representative from the African Union. Secretary of State Williams shook her head. "Less than they think. We've been preparing contingencies for years. The more they've treated us as junior partners, the more we've invested in self-sufficiency." President Carter, who had listened more than spoken throughout the session, finally rose from her seat. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, 30 years ago, humanity looked to the stars and found we weren't alone. We celebrated. We saw endless possibilities for growth, learning, and cooperation. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled leaders. Instead, we found a stagnant bureaucracy of ancient species who view us as useful tools at best, and dangerous children at worst. We've bled for them, shared our innovations with them, and received patronizing guidance in return. She placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. Ambassador Morrison's actions were bold, perhaps even reckless by diplomatic standards. But they were also true to the spirit of humanity. We will not be relegated to second-class status in this galaxy. What do you propose, Madam President? The Japanese representative asked. That we embrace this moment, she replied firmly. Not as a crisis, but as an opportunity to establish humanity's place in the stars on our own terms. I propose the formation of the human colonial empire, not an empire of conquest, but of cooperation and mutual respect among human settlements and any species who wish to ally with us as equals. The room erupted in discussion. Jake found himself exchanging glances with Admiral Harris, who gave him a subtle nod of approval. It won't be easy, the Admiral murmured. We'll need to secure our borders, establish new trade routes, accelerate our military production, and prepare for the Council's response, Jake added. They won't take this lying down. The first year after humanity's withdrawal tested Jake's conviction many times. The Council, as predicted, imposed a complete trade embargo. Human ships were denied docking rights at Council stations. Medical supplies that Earth had relied upon for certain rare conditions suddenly became unavailable. But humanity adapted. Colonial manufacturing facilities that had previously focused on raw materials for export were retooled to produce finished goods. Medical researchers worked around the clock to synthesize alternatives to alien pharmaceuticals. Military shipyards operated at full capacity, preparing for a confrontation everyone hoped would never come. President Carter appointed Jake as her special envoy to non-Council worlds, a position that took him to the fringes of known space, seeking allies among species who had their own grievances with the Council's hierarchical structure. The Mandari Confluence, a loose federation of insectoid species whose territory bordered several human colonies, were the first to break the Council's embargo. Their ambassador, Salenti, met with Jake on the neutral trading post of New Hong Kong. The Council overreached. Salenti clicked through her translator, her compound eyes reflecting the station's lights in kaleidoscopic patterns. Many species watch your defiance with interest. Interest doesn't pay the bills, Jake replied bluntly. We need trading partners, not spectators. Salenti's mandibles clattered in what Jake had learned was laughter. Direct, as always. Very well. The Confluence will establish formal trade agreements with your colonial empire. We have resources you need. You have manufactured goods we desire. It was a start. Within months, the Croatian Republic, aquatic mammals with a gift for biological sciences, followed suit. Then the Theiss nomads, whose vast fleets harvested gases from the upper atmospheres of gas giants. One by one, species on the Council's periphery began to align themselves with humanity. The Council's response was as predictable as it was ineffective. Sanctions against the rebel species, threats of military action that never materialized, propaganda about humanity's dangerous influence. They still don't understand us. Kate Sullivan observed during a strategy session 18 months after the withdrawal. She had been promoted to commander and served as Jake's chief aide in his diplomatic missions. They think we'll eventually come crawling back. They've never faced a species that walked away before, Jake replied. Their playbook is thousands of years old and doesn't account for our particular brand of stubbornness. President Carter, whose approval ratings had soared as the initial hardships of isolation gave way to a new era of innovation and expansion, authorized the formation of the Colonial Defense Force, a military branch specifically tasked with protecting human interests beyond the solar system. Admiral Harris took command, with a mandate to establish a defensive perimeter around human space, while avoiding direct confrontation with Council forces. It was a delicate balance, maintaining strength without provocation. The first test came 3 years after the withdrawal, when a Zilani patrol fleet entered the Proxima Centauri system, home to humanity's oldest extrasolar colony, without authorization. Captain Maya Patel of the CDF cruiser Resilient intercepted the Zilani vessels at the system's edge. The encounter was broadcast throughout human space. "Zilani vessels," Patel transmitted. "You have entered sovereign human territory without permission. State your purpose, or withdraw immediately." The Zilani commander's response dripped with centuries of assumed superiority. "We are conducting a council-mandated inspection of developing worlds. Your presence is noted, but irrelevant." Captain Patel's reply became the stuff of legend in the years that followed. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. This system is under human protection. The Council has no authority here. You have 10 minutes to alter course, or we will alter it for you." The Zilani commander, accustomed to deference from younger species, chose to ignore the warning. What followed was a brief but decisive demonstration of how much humanity's military technology had advanced without Council restrictions. The Resilient's newly developed phase disruptors, weapons that temporarily shifted matter out of normal space-time, disabled the Zilani vessels without destroying them. Captain Patel then had them towed to the system boundary and sent on their way with a clear message: human space was off-limits. The incident marked a turning point. The Council, for the first time in its long history, faced a younger species that not only refused to accept its authority, but possessed the military capability to enforce that refusal. Back on Earth, President Carter addressed the Global Security Council about the encounter. "We do not seek conflict with the Galactic Council or any of its member species," she stated firmly. "But neither will we tolerate incursions into our territory or attempts to reassert control over our destiny. The path forward must be one of mutual respect, something the Council has yet to demonstrate it understands." Jake, who had been on a diplomatic mission to the Theiss nomads when the Proxima Centauri incident occurred, returned to find Earth changed. The initial fear that had followed withdrawal had been replaced by a cautious pride. Humanity had stood its ground, and the galaxy had not ended. "They're calling it the Morrison Doctrine now," Kate informed him as their shuttle descended toward the rebuilt United Nations complex in New York. "Respect or keep your distance?" Jake winced. "I'm a diplomat, not a military strategist. This isn't what I intended when I walked out of that chamber." Kate studied him thoughtfully. "Isn't it? You knew what you were doing. Ambassador, you knew humanity deserved better than what the Council was offering." Perhaps she was right. Jake had spent 30 years trying to earn humanity a place at the table, only to discover the game was rigged from the start. Maybe a new game with new rules was exactly what he had intended. The 5th anniversary of humanity's withdrawal from the Council coincided with the completion of the New Frontier Station at the edge of human space. A massive construction designed as both a military outpost and a diplomatic hub. It symbolized humanity's new approach to galactic relations, open to cooperation but prepared for conflict. President Carter, now in her second term and enjoying unprecedented approval ratings, invited representatives from 17 non-council species to the station's inauguration ceremony. Jake, as special envoy, had spent months arranging the guest list and ensuring security protocols were impeccable. Quite a change from the Council chamber on Nexus Prime, Kate observed as they watched delegates from across the galaxy arrive at the station's diplomatic docking bays. Jake nodded, taking in the diversity of life forms disembarking from their vessels. Insectoid Mandarin, moving in perfect synchronization, Caratian delegates in their floating water spheres, Theiss nomads wrapped in their traditional gas capture membranes, and a dozen other species, each with their own unique biologies and cultures. "The difference," Jake replied, "is that everyone here chose to come. No one was coerced or manipulated into attendance. The ceremony itself was deliberately modest by council standards. No grand pronouncements of galactic destiny. No claims of inherent superiority. President Carter simply welcomed the assembled delegates to what she called a new forum for interstellar cooperation based on mutual respect and shared interests. As the formal proceedings concluded and the diplomatic reception began, Jake found himself approached by an unexpected figure, Ambassador Torvik of the Tauran hegemony, one of the council members who had supported Resolution 4471 5 years earlier. "Ambassador Morrison," the massive, bear-like alien rumbled, his translator rendering his growls into measured speech. "Your presence is surprising." Jake inclined his head slightly, maintaining diplomatic courtesy, despite their history. "As is yours, Ambassador Torvik. I wasn't aware the council permitted its members to attend functions hosted by, what was the phrase? Aggressive, immature species requiring guidance." Torvik's fur rippled in what Jake had learned was discomfort. "The council does not know I am here. I come as an observer." "An observer?" Jake repeated skeptically. "The galaxy has changed, Ambassador Morrison," Torvik said, lowering his voice. "Your withdrawal was meant to isolate humanity. Instead, it has exposed fractures within the council that have existed for millennia." Jake kept his expression neutral, though internally, his mind raced with implications. "The council has stood for thousands of years, Ambassador. I doubt humanity's absence has caused much disturbance." Torvik made a sound that his translator rendered as a bitter laugh. "You underestimate what you built in your brief time among us. The medical corps you established have collapsed without human doctors. The engineering guilds have stagnated without human innovation. Even the peacekeeping forces have proven less effective without human tactical adaptability." "That sounds like the council's problem, not ours," Jake replied, though he felt a twinge of concern for the innocent lives affected by these developments. "It will become your problem," Torvik warned. "When desperate council leadership seeks to demonstrate strength by making an example of the species that defied them." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" "A warning," Torvik corrected. "From someone who has come to respect human resilience, if not always human methods. The Zilani speaker has authorized the deployment of a planet cracker to the Tau Ceti system." Jake felt his blood run cold. The planet cracker was no metaphor. It was a council superweapon capable of destabilizing a planet's tectonic structure, rendering it uninhabitable. Its use had been authorized only twice in the council's long history, both times against species that had engaged in genocidal aggression. Tau Ceti is home to 3 human colonies with a combined population of 12 million, Jake said quietly. Civilian settlements with minimal military presence, which makes them ideal targets for those seeking to prove that defying the council leads to destruction. Torvik replied. "The deployment is scheduled for 3 standard months from now." Jake studied the alien's posture, searching for signs of deception. "Why tell me this? Why risk council censure?" Torvik's massive shoulders shifted in what approximated a shrug. "Perhaps I have come to believe that the galaxy needs the balance humanity provides against species grown complacent with power. Or perhaps I simply prefer enemies I can respect to allies I cannot." Before Jake could respond, Torvik inclined his head in a formal gesture of conclusion and moved away through the crowded reception hall, leaving Jake with information that could prevent a catastrophe or trigger an interstellar war if acted upon incorrectly. He found Kate at the edge of the reception, deep in conversation with a Croatian scientist. "Commander Sullivan," he interrupted, "I need you to arrange an immediate secure communication with President Carter and Admiral Harris. Priority Alpha." Kate's expression sharpened instantly. "Yes, sir. What's happened?" "The Council has escalated beyond what we anticipated," Jake replied grimly. "We need to prepare for the worst while I try to prevent it." The emergency session convened in the station's secure command center included President Carter and her key advisors via quantum entanglement communication, providing real-time discussion despite the vast distances involved. "A planet cracker," Admiral Harris repeated, his holographic projection showing him pacing in his office on Earth. "Are we certain this intelligence is reliable?" "Torvik has no obvious motive to mislead us," Jake replied. "And it aligns with intelligence from our Mandari contacts about unusual movement of Zalani military assets." President Carter's hologram leaned forward, her expression grave. "Regardless of the intelligence's reliability, we cannot risk 12 million lives. Admiral, what are our options?" Admiral Harris frowned. "The Tau Ceti system has minimal defensive installations. It was considered too far from potential Council threats to justify the expense. We can redeploy ships from the Alpha Centauri fleet, but not enough to stop a determined Council attack force." Dr. Ryan Phillips, Director of Advanced Weapons Research, cleared his throat. "Madam President, there may be another option, Project Aegis." Jake exchanged glances with Kate. Neither had heard of this project. "Explain," President Carter commanded. "Project Aegis is a planetary defense system designed to counter exactly this type of threat," Phillips explained. "A network of field generators that, when activated, creates a phase barrier around a planet, similar to the technology in our phase disruptors, but on a planetary scale." "Would it stop a planet cracker?" Jake asked. Phillips hesitated. "In theory, yes. The phase barrier would prevent the weapon's energy from reaching the planetary crust. But it's never been tested at full scale, and the power requirements are enormous." "How quickly could it be deployed?" President Carter asked. "We have prototypes ready for the 3 largest Tau Ceti colonies," Phillips replied. "With maximum priority and resources, we could have them operational within 8 weeks. That leaves a dangerous window of vulnerability," Admiral Harris pointed out. "And deployment of this scale won't go unnoticed. It could provoke the Council into acting sooner." Jake had been silent, considering options. Now he spoke up. "What if we use that to our advantage? Make the deployment visible, even ostentatious. Let Council spies report back exactly what we're doing." Kate frowned. "Wouldn't that just accelerate their timeline?" "Possibly," Jake acknowledged. "But it would also force them to reconsider their approach. The planet cracker works because worlds are defenseless against it. If we demonstrate that humanity has a counter, it loses its terror value." President Carter nodded slowly. "A deterrent rather than just a defense. Admiral Harris, your assessment?" The Admiral considered for a moment. "It's risky. If the Aegis system fails, we lose the colonies and our credibility. But if it works," he straightened, "if it works, we change the balance of power permanently." "And if we combine it with diplomatic outreach," Jake added, "not to the Council as a body, but to individual species within it. Torvik's presence here suggests fractures we could exploit. If enough Council members question the wisdom of this aggression, they might pull back before risking a confrontation they're not sure they can win." President Carter finished. "Very well. We proceed on both fronts. Admiral Harris, coordinate with Dr. Phillips on the Aegis deployment. Ambassador Morrison, you'll lead the diplomatic effort." As the meeting concluded, Kate lingered behind with Jake in the now empty command center. "Do you think it will work?" she asked quietly. "Will the Council really back down because we show off a new defensive toy?" Jake sighed heavily. "The Council has existed for thousands of years because it values stability above all else. The planet cracker isn't just a weapon. It's a symbol of their ultimate authority. If we neutralize it, we shatter that symbol," Kate concluded, "and force them to deal with us as equals, not subjects." Jake nodded. "But first, we need to make sure Aegis actually works." The 7 weeks that followed were perhaps the most intense of Jake's diplomatic career. While Admiral Harris coordinated the massive logistical operation to deploy the Aegis systems to Tau Ceti, Jake embarked on a whirlwind diplomatic mission to key Council species. He met with the Tauran Hegemony Council, emphasizing the risk to galactic stability if the Council deployed a planet cracker against civilian worlds. He visited the Mandari Confluence's central hive, discussing mutual defense pacts in case of Council aggression. He even managed a clandestine meeting with representatives from 3 mid-level Council species who had expressed private concerns about the Zilani's growing dominance. Throughout it all, humanity made no secret of the Aegis deployment. In fact, they invited scientific observers from friendly species to witness the installation of the massive field generators on the 3 main Tau Ceti colonies. News of the impenetrable shield spread through galactic communication channels, carefully amplified by human information operations. The Council's response came 6 weeks after Torvik's warning. As the first Aegis generator came online, a Zilani diplomatic vessel entered the Sol system under a flag of truce, requesting a meeting with human leadership. President Carter chose to meet them at the new frontier station rather than Earth, a subtle message about humanity's expanding presence. Jake stood at her side as Ambassador Zeloth, flanked by representatives from 3 other Council species, entered the station's diplomatic chamber. "President Carter," Zeloth began, her translator rendering her sibilant speech into flat standard. "The Council extends greetings." "Ambassador Zeloth," Carter replied coolly. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Zeloth's scales shifted colors slightly, a sign of discomfort. Jake knew from experience. It has come to the Council's attention that human worlds in the Tau Ceti system are deploying advanced defensive technology of concerning capability. President Carter's expression remained impassive. "The defensive preparations of sovereign human worlds are not the Council's concern, Ambassador, unless, of course, you had plans that such defenses might interfere with." It was a direct challenge, forcing Zeloth to either acknowledge or deny the planet cracker deployment. The Zilani ambassador's upper limbs twitched in agitation. "The Council maintains peace throughout the galaxy," she said, avoiding the implicit question. "Technologies that disrupt the balance of power threaten that peace." Jake stepped forward. "Interesting perspective, Ambassador. Would you also classify planet crackers as technologies that disrupt the balance of power?" The other Council representatives shifted uncomfortably. Clearly, not all of them had been informed of the planned attack. "I am not here to discuss theoretical weapon systems," Zeloth replied stiffly. "No," Jake agreed. "You're here because your theoretical planet cracker is now useless against our very real Aegis system, and the Council needs to save face." President Carter raised a hand slightly, signaling Jake to step back. "Ambassador Zeloth, let me be direct. Humanity left the Council because we were not treated as equals. We have since established our own path, our own alliances, our own future. We do not seek conflict with the Council, but neither will we accept threats or intimidation." She gestured to a data display that activated along one wall, showing the status of the Aegis deployment, now at 82% completion. "As you can see, our defensive preparations will be complete within days. Any aggressive action against human worlds will be met with consequences." Zeloth's scales darkened. "Is that a threat, President Carter?" "A statement of fact," Carter replied evenly. "Humanity wished to be left in peace. The Council planned to crack our planets. We have responded accordingly. What happens next is the Council's choice." The meeting ended shortly thereafter, with Zeloth promising to convey Earth's concerns to the full Council. As the Zilani delegation departed, Jake turned to President Carter. "They'll still come," he said quietly. "They've committed too many resources to back down completely." Carter nodded grimly. "I know. But now they'll come with doubt, not certainty. And that may make all the difference." 3 days later, long-range sensors detected a massive Council fleet entering the Tau Ceti system. At its center was the unmistakable silhouette of a planet cracker, a massive vessel surrounded by energy collection arrays that resembled a metallic spider. Admiral Harris deployed the Colonial Defense Force to intercept, while on the three main Tau Ceti colonies. The Aegis systems were activated for the first time. Shimmering barriers of energy encased each world, distorting the light of the system's sun as it passed through them. Jake, along with President Carter and her key advisors, monitored the situation from the New Frontier Station's command center. The tension was palpable as the Council fleet approached the human defensive line. "They're hailing us," the communications officer announced. "On screen," Admiral Harris ordered from his position with the defense fleet. The image of a Draar commander appeared, a surprise to everyone in the command center. The Draar, a species known for their militaristic culture, rarely represented the Council in diplomatic matters. "Human vessels," the Draar commander growled, his translator struggling with his guttural language. "The Council has authorized a demonstration of consequences for species who reject galactic order. Stand aside or be destroyed with the colonies." Admiral Harris, resplendent in his formal uniform, responded with calculated calm. "Commander, I see you've brought a planet cracker to a shield fight. Perhaps your intelligence briefing was incomplete. Allow me to update you." A tactical display appeared beside the Admiral's transmission, showing the energy readings from the activated Aegis shields. "These defensive systems are specifically designed to counter your primary weapon," Harris continued. "But more importantly, this confrontation is unnecessary. Humanity has no quarrel with the Draar or most Council species. Our issue was and remains with a system that demands subservience, rather than offering partnership." The Draar commander's facial tentacles writhed in what Jake recognized as agitation. "The Council has spoken. The demonstration will proceed." Admiral Harris sighed visibly. "Very well. But know that we offered peace and were refused. What follows is on your conscience, not ours." The transmission ended, and the Council fleet resumed its advance toward the innermost colony world. "Admiral," President Carter spoke from the command center, "you are authorized to defend our colonies by any means necessary." "Understood, Madam President," Harris replied grimly. "All ships, Battle Formation Delta. Prepare phase disruptors and gravitic torpedoes." What followed was the largest space battle involving human forces since first contact. The Council fleet, comprised primarily of Zilani and Draar vessels, possessed superior numbers. But the Colonial Defense Force had spent 5 years developing technologies specifically designed to counter Council capabilities. Phase disruptors temporarily shifted Council ships partially out of normal space, disrupting their systems. Gravitic torpedoes created localized distortions that overwhelmed inertial dampeners, throwing vessels off course. Human ships, smaller but more maneuverable, executed complex attack patterns that confused the Council's more rigid tactical doctrines. And at the center of it all, the planet cracker continued its inexorable advance toward the innermost colony. "They're testing our resolve," Jake observed as they watched the tactical display. "They want to see if the Aegis system actually works." President Carter's expression was grim. "And if it doesn't, 12 million people die." On the colony world below, Dr. Phillips monitored the Aegis Control Center as the planet cracker moved into firing position. Around him, engineers and scientists worked frantically to maintain the massive energy field surrounding their world. "Energy buildup detected in the planet cracker's main emitter," one technician reported, voice tense. "They're preparing to fire." Phillips opened a direct channel to the New Frontier Station. "Madam President, the moment of truth has arrived. Aegis is operating at 98% efficiency, but we've never tested it against this level of energy." President Carter's voice came through clearly, despite the distance. "Dr. Phillips, the hopes of humanity rest with you and your team. Whatever happens, know that you've done everything possible." Phillips nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Understood, Madam President. Reinforcing field harmonics now." Above the planet, the Council's planet cracker extended its energy collection arrays to their full span. A terrible light began to build at its center as it harvested the energy of Tau Ceti's sun and concentrated it into a beam designed to penetrate to a planet's core. "They're firing!" someone shouted in the command center. On the tactical display, a blinding beam of energy lanced from the planet Cracker toward the colony world. It struck the Aegis shield with apocalyptic force, creating a visual distortion visible even from orbit. For a heart-stopping moment, the shield fluctuated, energy patterns rippling across its surface as it absorbed the tremendous power being directed against it. In the control center below, warning alarms blared as systems approached overload. "Divert auxiliary power," Phillips ordered. "Maintain field integrity at all costs." And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ended. The planet Cracker's beam flickered and died as the massive vessel systems overloaded from the unexpected resistance. The shield had held. In the battle above, the momentum shifted instantly. Council vessels, witnessing the failure of their superweapon, began to break formation. The Colonial Defense Force pressed its advantage, disabling ship after ship with precision strikes. "The Drar commander is hailing us again," the communications officer announced. Admiral Harris, his uniform now disheveled from the rigors of battle, nodded. On screen, the Drar commander appeared, his vessel's bridge visibly damaged behind him. "This is not possible," he growled. "No species has ever withstood a planet Cracker." "Perhaps," Harris replied. "It's time the Council reconsidered what is possible. Will you withdraw, or shall we continue this demonstration of human capabilities?" For a tense moment, the Drar commander was silent, his facial tentacles writhing in complex patterns. Then, with visible reluctance, he inclined his upper body in what his species considered a gesture of concession. "The Council fleet will withdraw from this system," he stated. "But know that this matter is not concluded. Humans, the Council does not forget." "Neither do we," Harris replied simply. "Safe journey home, Commander." As the Council fleet limped away from Tau Ceti, the command center on New Frontier Station erupted in cheers and embraces. President Carter allowed herself a brief smile before raising her hands for quiet. "This is a momentous victory," she acknowledged. "But only one battle in a longer struggle. The Council now knows they cannot simply crush us militarily. But that doesn't mean they'll accept us as equals." Jake stepped forward. "Madam President, with your permission, I believe this moment presents a unique diplomatic opportunity." Carter nodded for him to continue. "The Council's failure here will reverberate throughout the galaxy," Jake explained. "Species that have chafed under Zilani dominance for centuries will see that the Council is not invincible. The fractures Ambassador Torvik mentioned will widen." "You're suggesting we exploit those fractures?" Secretary Williams asked. Jake shook his head. "Not exploit. Offer an alternative. The human colonial empire has already formed alliances with non-Council species based on mutual respect and benefit. What if we extended that model, created a new interstellar forum where all species, regardless of age or development, have equal voice?" President Carter considered this for a long moment. "A rival to the Galactic Council," she mused. "Not founded on domination, but cooperation." "Exactly," Jake agreed. "We've proven we can defend ourselves. Now, let's prove we can lead differently than the Council has for millennia." 5 years after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, the Treaty of New Frontier established the Interstellar Cooperative Alliance, initially comprised of humanity and 14 non-Council species. The alliance explicitly rejected the hierarchical structure of the Council in favor of a consensus-based approach, where all member species held equal status. The Mandari Confluence and Croatian Republic were founding members, along with the Theiss nomads and several former Council species, who had broken away in the aftermath of the Tau Ceti confrontation. Even the Tauran hegemony, represented by Ambassador Torvik, signed the treaty as observers, though they maintained their Council membership. Jake Morrison, now serving as the first human High Representative to the Alliance, stood on the observation deck of the expanded New Frontier Station, watching ships from across the galaxy dock at what had become the Alliance's headquarters. Did you ever imagine this would be the result when you stormed out of the council chamber 10 years ago? Kate Sullivan asked, now a full captain and commander of the station's security forces. Jake shook his head, smiling slightly. I was just angry, tired of being patronized by species who claimed wisdom but practiced domination. And now? She prompted. Now, Jake replied, gesturing to the diverse vessels arriving. We have the chance to build something better. Not perfect. We're still all driven by our own interests and histories, but at least founded on the principle that age doesn't automatically confer authority. A diplomatic aide approached, interrupting their conversation. High Representative, the Zolani envoy has arrived. Jake straightened his formal attire, a blend of traditional Earth diplomatic dress and symbols of the various alliance species. Thank you. I'll meet them in the diplomatic reception area. The Zolani envoy was not Ambassador Zeloth, as Jake had expected, but a younger member of the species whose scales still showed the vibrant colors of relative youth. Envoy Talaris. Jake greeted them formally. The Alliance welcomes you to New Frontier Station. Hi, Representative Morrison, Talaris replied, her translator rendering her speech into precise standard. The Council extends greetings and acknowledges the significance of this invitation. It was as close to humility as Jake had ever heard from a Zolani representative. Please, join me in the observation lounge. The view of the galaxy from there is quite remarkable. As they walked, Jake noted the Zolani's curious glances at the diverse lifeforms moving through the station, representatives of species both familiar and unknown to Council experience. Many of these species had never been deemed developed enough for Council consideration. Yet here they participated as full members of the Alliance. In the observation lounge, with its panoramic view of the starfield beyond, Jake ordered refreshments suitable for Zolani physiology before addressing the purpose of the meeting. Envoy Talaris, I appreciate the Council's decision to send a representative after all these years. May I ask what prompted this change in approach? Talaris's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a muted blue that Jake interpreted as diplomatic caution. The galaxy has changed, High Representative Morrison. The Council has existed for 50,000 years based on certain principles and hierarchies that seemed immutable. Recent events have suggested otherwise. You mean the Council's failure at Tau Ceti, Jake stated directly, and the subsequent departure of 7 member species to join the Alliance. Among other factors, Talaris acknowledged. The Council's leadership has recognized that adaptation may be necessary for continued relevance in a changing galaxy. Jake allowed himself a small smile. That must have been a difficult conclusion for a body that prides itself on timeless wisdom. Indeed, the Zolani replied, with what Jake thought might be a hint of irony. I am authorized to discuss potential areas of cooperation between the Council and the Alliance, as well as protocols to prevent future military confrontations. Not reconciliation, Jake asked. No invitation for humanity to return to the fold? Talaris's scales rippled in what approximated a Zolani shrug. That would imply the Council's approach was mistaken. Let us say instead that both organizations may benefit from defined relations. Diplomatic to the end, Jake observed. Very well, Envoy Talaris. The Alliance is open to establishing formal relations with the Council on the basis of mutual respect and non-interference. We have no desire to dismantle the Council or its traditions, only to offer an alternative model for species who prefer it. And that is perhaps what the Council's leadership finds most unsettling, Talaris admitted. The idea that there could be another way to organize galactic affairs after 50 millennia of certainty. Jake gazed out at the stars, considering the immensity of time and space that had brought them to this moment. Change is the only constant in the universe. Envoy Talaris. Species rise and fall. Empires expand and contract. Even stars are born and die. Perhaps the greatest wisdom is recognizing when evolution becomes necessary. The Zilani was silent for a long moment, her gaze following Jake's out to the starfield. There is a saying among my people, High Representative, the slowest current shapes the deepest canyon. Perhaps humanity's impatience has carved a new path that even the ancient rivers must eventually follow. Jake turned back to the envoy, struck by the unexpected philosophical turn. Does that mean the Council is ready to treat with the Alliance as equals? Not immediately, Teleris replied honestly. But the conversation has begun, and after 50,000 years of certainty, that alone represents a seismic shift. As their meeting concluded and the Zilani envoy departed, Jake found himself back on the observation deck, watching the comings and goings of Alliance vessels. Kate joined him, having overseen security for the diplomatic encounter. "How did it go?" she asked. "About as expected," Jake replied. "They're not ready to admit they were wrong, but they're willing to talk. For the Zilani, that's practically a revolution." Kate leaned against the railing beside him. 10 years ago, we were trying to earn their respect by following their rules. Now they're coming to us, trying to understand ours. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of the decade, the battles fought, the alliances formed, the new path carved for humanity and its partners across the stars. The day humanity left the Council was the day the universe changed, he said quietly. Not because we were special or superior, but because sometimes it takes an outsider to question traditions, so ancient they've been mistaken for natural laws. Beyond the station's transparent walls, a new Alliance vessel moved majestically into dock, its hull bearing markings from a dozen different species. A visible symbol of the cooperation the Alliance represented. And behind it, small but significant, a Council diplomatic vessel waited its turn in the docking queue. The galaxy was changing, slowly, painfully, but undeniably, and humanity, for better or worse, had been the catalyst. "What happens next?" Kate asked, echoing the same question she had posed a decade earlier when they had first walked out of the Council chamber. Jake smiled, the weight of years and responsibilities evident in his expression, but also a quiet pride in how far they had come. "Now, Captain Sullivan," he replied, "we continue building something worth the struggle. Not an empire of conquest or a council of elders, but a genuine community of equals across the stars. The hard part, as it turns out, never ends, but neither does the possibility."